Oopsie, that went wonky. You know, you'd think by the end of the semester I could remember which light switch does what. Okay, let's get started. I want to finish up talking about content analysis and then moving into mixed methods. Before I do that, though, I have a potato brain today. My brain is like a baked potato. Too much stress. All right. So I'm working on like your mini lab, trying to get that sorted, and then I'm going to jump in on the major lab. L'Oreal is marking the major lab now. I'm watching her progress, and it is going forward. Optimistically, I can do all of this tomorrow if I take some meth and really hype myself up on amphetamines like I'm an F-16 pilot or something. Maybe just a bunch of Dayquil will do it. Yeah, so I'm going to try to get this done. This is now priority one for me to get your feedback so you have time to look at it and make adjustments for the other major lab that's coming. Okay, tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. or 2, depending on which lab you signed up for. It is the last lab, right? The last one. And I combined my idea for lab 5 and 6 into one super lab. So you then will have to complete assignment number 5, super mini lab number 5. Super. It's worth twice as much as the others, but it has 2 tasks in it. So L'Oreal will walk you through all of that tomorrow, and it's up on Canvas, so you can take a look at it if you need. Any other relevant things I need to talk about? No. If you want to see your midterm, you still have time. Please don't. I have no time. No, it's fine. Just make an appointment with me and we can go over it. And hopefully I can get myself caught up here on the marking, and then we'll just slink into the end of the term. We have 2 topics left. We are almost done. You've almost learned everything there is to know about being introduced to methodologies. Not everything about methodologies. Much of this goes much deeper if you decide to dig into a specific one, but the introduction, you've been introduced to almost everything. So take that for what it's worth. All right, so we were talking about discourse analysis, and you probably know how I feel about it by now. No, discourse analysis is really useful. Despite its postmodern and Foucauldian roots, it is a useful tool. The last kind of piece of discourse analysis that we didn't get to talk about last time is what's called critical discourse analysis. And again, this has a very, I'll say, Marxian / Foucault was a Marxist, Foucauldian, though Foucault never totally wanted to admit his Marxism in lots of ways. But a Marxian kind of Foucauldian sort of style to it, and critical discourse analysis you'll see in things like, like critical race theory, critical feminism, other critical things. Those are the 2 that jump to mind, right? And typically, critical feminism is the sort of Marxian kind of take on feminism. Usually critical discourse analysis is, exposes the political nature of examined texts and discourses and is looking for things like power hierarchies, right? So if you were watching like the James Bond films, right? James Bond, through a critical feminist lens, you would probably be looking at the way that it reaffirms patriarchy, right? James Bond has his Bond girls, and he's the conquering hero who flies in and saves the beautiful, hapless woman from whatever distress she happens to have fallen into, right? And that this reaffirms that, men strong and women not strong. I don't know. I'm doing a great feminist analysis right now. Women not strong? Okay. But, like the typical role of men is like powerful, dominant, aggressive, and women as passive, subservient, submissive, all of that stuff, right? So it would be to expose those power hierarchies, and the social inequalities that they lead to. And then, typically with this kind of social justice focus, to undermine that, to expose it, and to argue for change, for ways that this could be different. Okay, I'm going to run through conversation analysis really quickly because it's in the textbook. This is more typical in linguistics. I'm sure there are sociological kind of uses for it. I just can't think of any sociological studies that did really hard conversation analysis. So it's a little bit like the one we didn't talk about because I skipped over it. The structure, I can't remember even what it's called now because my brain is a potato. But basically, it's one of the quantitative methods. It's all about counting interactions and how often. Structured observation, potato brain. Okay. Structured observation, it has kind of links to it in the sense that it's all about doing a detailed analysis of how people talk to each other. So it can be, again, one of these things that I think sits on the qualitative border, right? Where often, you're doing a kind of qualitative analysis of talk with quantitative sort of aspect to it. So you have things like, when you're doing conversation analysis, you would look at what's called I can never pronounce this word, indexicality. Not indexiality, which is what I usually say, indexicality, which is basically analyzing, things like pauses and sounds that have meaning depending on the context in which they are used. So something like this would be, you're listening to a conversation, and you might see that, I don't know, let's say you ask me a question in class, and I respond, I start with the sound, that would mean something like, hang on, I'm thinking. Now, let's say that you ask me a question and I'm like, that means I don't like the question you just asked me, and I'm trying to figure out how to rephrase things without offending you or getting myself fired, right? Like I don't want to demean you by saying that the question you asked is not a good one, but that's what I think, right? Or you make a statement and I'm like, that has a very different kind of meaning as an and this is the kind of thing that you would be looking for if you're doing sort of indexical analysis of talk, right? Someone says something and another person responds using, a sound or maybe a pause, and it's like, those things can have meaning as well. And then reflexivity, it's how social order is created through communication, right? Basically, like how talk can structure hierarchies. All right, let's go through this really quickly. Okay, conversation analysis, technically it's qualitative, but it does, like I said, often have these sort of quantitative aspects to it, like when you get into, counting how many times a person spoke, how many times, one particular person was dominating a conversation, the length of time they spoke. It is a qualitative tradition, but it can have really quantitative aspects. Okay, it is, aimed at something like a contextual understanding, and it, tends to view things in a constructivist sense, right? We're building our social relationship through talk and those things, right? Maybe I'm trying to convince you of something. And yeah, it's naturalistic, right? Because the goal of something like conversation analysis is to find real conversations and analyze them. Okay. I spoil everything because I talk 3 slides ahead, right? It has aspects of quantitative research. You're doing these fine-grained, analyses of people talking, and often, you're quantifying things. That's a number sign, by the way. So you're counting the number of things, right? Structure of talk is analyzed, right? And so you might break things down into, time, number of phrases, times word used, etc., right? Times and times. Time and times. There can be a bit of a positivist orientation on replicability, right? You use the same methodologies to retest different types of conversations, right? So you can have this kind of replicable methodology where if you're looking at dominance in conversation, you can focus on time spoken or, things like that. That's not important right now. Yeah, so context means just context means just the word said prior to a response. Yeah, typically, when we talk about context in conversation analysis, it's generally not like, it was 1984 and we were having this conversation. It was a sunny day on the beach in Southern California. It's like, what's the context directly of the words and the order in which they're spoken. Okay, assumptions. Talk is structured, right? That there are rules to talking to each other, and we tend to follow those rules, and those rules tell us something. Talk is forged contextually, right? As we're talking to each other, we're creating what we're doing, and the analysis should be grounded in data, right? You should actually be listening to conversations, not theoretical conversations in your head that nobody ever had, right? Okay. I think I got like one slide left of this, and then we're going to move on to a new theme. Okay. If I say okay any more times today, will the world explode? I don't know. It's one of those odd phrases that I say a lot, or words. We all have our garbage words. Okay. So things that you might look like in terms of how talk is organized. Things like turn taking, right? How does the conversation proceed, right? I say something, you say something, I ask a question, you respond, I make a statement, how do you react, right? What is the turn taking? How does a conversation proceed? What's sometimes called adjacency pairs, how talk moves between parties, right? So question, answer, statement, conflict, I don't know, whatever it is, whatever happens to be, like if you were doing a debate, right? You were organizing the talk or analyzing. Breath. Okay, analyze, not organizing, analyzing the talk in a debate, right? You might look at statement, counter, statement, counter, right? And these would be adjacency pairs because this is how that particular type of conversation is structured. So and you can analyze that, right? Like how many times do people go through this kind of structure? And then does it shift to like a question answer or those sorts of things? Okay, and preference organization, you can look at things like preferred responses and non-preferred responses. Non-preferred responses require a justification, right? So this would be something like, let's say you were doing an analysis of people's chats on Tinder, right, as a sort of conversation analysis. Ashley's already laughing at my example, and I haven't even given it yet. Right, your Tinder date. Oh, okay. Anyway, sorry, you started laughing. That just set me off. Oh, what the hell was I talking about? Right. Preferred response, non-preferred response, right? So you're on Tinder and you're attempting to get a date, and you say, "Hey, do you want to meet for coffee?" Obviously, there the preferred response would be something like, "Yes," right? Yeah, that'd be great. Let's meet for coffee on Thursday at the Remedy, blah 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 blah. Right? That would be preferred response. Versus a non-preferred response, you're like, "Hey, let's go for coffee," and the other person is like, "Nah, I'm good." Right? And then you're like, "Why?" So that is what we call a non-preferred response. And generally, non-preferred responses require justification, right? Or if you're, because if you get a preferred response, you move forward with the conversation. Non-preferred responses often require then a justification from the person, right? You ask your friend, "Hey, you want to go for dinner?" And they're like, "No." Like, "Why not? You're not like me. Are you mad at me? Did you read what I wrote about you in my secret diary? What's going on?" Right? You can analyze those in conversation analysis, how people proceed through both preferred and non-preferred responses, how non-preferred responses change tones of conversation, change orders of conversation, those sorts of things, right? Okay. And conversation analysis, or CA, is structural analysis of talk, right? So reference to cultural context for explaining conversation are not permitted, right? You're just looking at particular conversations. You can't be like, you can't bring in the wider context. Okay. We're done content analysis. I'm sure you're like, "Oh yes, finally." Okay. So why would someone choose content analysis? And again, it's one of those methodologies that not everybody loves, because you're not typically, as the research, when you're doing content analysis in most cases, as compared to, say, interviews or ethnography, you're less directly involved, right, with your research subjects. So why choose it? Well, for one, it's very transparent, right? Especially if you're using publicly available content. Someone can go check your work, right? They can check that you properly, that you weren't misrepresenting something that was present in a particular text, right? You cite your sources, you're looking at the diary of some person, some prominent individual. It's easy to check. It allows for longitudinal analysis, right? So you can carry this on for a long time, and you can go back in time, like with interviews, you can't go back, or survey data or whatever, you can't go back and do your interviews in 1988, right? That time has passed. But I can go find a newspaper article from 1988 or a television show from 1988, no problem. Everybody wore very funny clothes. It was baggy and bad and a lot of neon. Aside from that, I remember nothing about the 80s, even though I lived through most of it. Right, so you can do longitudinal analysis, and you can do longitudinal analysis back in time, right? You can use your time machine or an archive to go do it. Okay, unobtrusive, absolutely. You're not dealing with people. You never have to worry about reactivity when you're using content analysis. No reactivity. Flexible, it can be used with several kinds of unstructured information. Yeah, you can bring in lots of different things, lots of different types, right? My dissertation has newspaper, trade publications, TV shows, radio interviews. I got a ton of cool content analysis in my dissertation. So, all fun stuff. And overcome social barriers to researcher access, because there are none, right? You're not having to talk to gatekeepers. You're using, typically existing sources either that are in an archive or are publicly available. Okay. Disadvantages, right? Some of the text that you use might not be the best. Maybe I won't draw, I'll make an X instead of a check mark. If you're dealing with more than one person, right, you can have intercoder or intracoder unreliability. So two people might be coding, articles in a different way. If you're doing it yourself, you don't have to worry about that. Well, I guess intercoder, intracoder. Yeah, I guess you were worried about intracoder unreliability. Maybe you change your way of doing things halfway through. It can happen, right? And your own reliability can be a problem. Yeah, potential for invalid conjectures, especially in discussion of latent meanings, right? You can interpret things maybe in a funny way. So sometimes your interpretation might be out in left field. You might interpret Paw Patrol as an allegory for police power in 20th century North America. You're like, Chase is a symbol of everything that's wrong with society. I'm not saying that that's wrong, but it's an odd interpretation nonetheless. All right, difficult to answer why questions, right? You might not know the why. You can say the what. The what question is really easy. The why question is a little bit harder because you're not, except in very rare cases, you're not able to actually get in and talk to the people who produce the text. And a Ouija board, unfortunately, does not count as a methodological tool. You cannot call upon the dead spirit of people who are departed and ask them, oh, why, Stanley Kubrick, did you choose to direct this scene this way? Though that would be fun. And actually, if one of you could try that, just like try going for a master's and be like, one of my methodologies was I summoned the spirit of Stanley Kubrick through my Ouija board and he answered all my questions. And I just want to see what the reaction to that would be. It would destroy your life and you would waste your time. So please do. I need a spectator sport. Okay. An emphasis on measurement may make it a bit theoretical in nature, right? And and certainly it's less definitive often, certainly than quantitative methods. Okay, enough with content analysis. But seriously, think about the Ouija board thing. I do need to punk the academy at some point. Okay, where is my second to last slideshow? See if I can do it without giving myself an epileptic seizure. And now I have to check if this always screws up the... Oh, it didn't. How nice. Okay. Usually me re-rendering things or changing the display scaling screws up the feed. Okay. How are we doing for time? We have 25 minutes. Let's talk about mixed methods. Okay. Now, I will say I want to start this with an introduction that my friend Dorothy told me I have to make. She says there is no such thing as mixed methods. She says this is a foul lie that is propagated by researchers who are dumb. She has strong opinions. She prefers the term multiple methods. Because her contention is always, are you actually mixing those methods or are you using two methods in parallel? And I can see her point, and I think she's probably right. But everybody talks mixed methods, right? Even though technically they're not actually mixing methods. So let's talk mixed methods. So the idea with mixed methods is that, our quant, bless you, and qual. Actually, I don't know why I drew an equal sign there. Quant plus qual equals mixed methods. Okay. Quantitative and qualitative research potentially have a lot to offer each other. And potentially the distinction between the two that the course has been based on up to this point might be somewhat artificial in its nature, right? That quantitative and qualitative research might be somewhat less incompatible And we might have to think of them less separately than we often tend to in a course like this, where we're like, never can anyone cross the wall between them. Okay, that might not be so true. So why would you do a mixed method study? Aside from it's really fun. So potentially quant and qual have a lot in common, and they can complement each other, right? They're both potentially required to gain knowledge of the social world, and they ask different kinds of questions, right? Different kinds of questions that when you put them, when you keep quant and qual kind of separate in their own silos, you might be able to answer the what, right? I'm always worried that people's devices are gonna like shatter, and somehow it's my fault because I was being too boring and you fell asleep and knocked over your tablet. That's my worried. Okay. So quantitative might help you answer the what, right? It can be really useful for getting a map of the social landscape, for, let's talk, because I was talking in sociology of religion today, the growth of people who identify as having no religion, right? It can trace, the trajectory of no religion, from very low in the 1970s to, about a third of the population today. What it can't answer is the why, because I got too close to the bottom. Okay. Because it can't answer the motivation that people had for making social change or certain social behaviors. It might be able to guess at like the direction of causation of two social phenomena, but in a lot of cases, you actually have to sort of go talk to people to answer that why question. So they ask different questions. They have different sorts of skill sets and tools. They want to know different things about the social world, but one without the other might be missing some of those broader pieces of context. Okay. Now, that said, one of the potential problems with mixing them, and we'll get to some of the objections to mixed methods research, is that they do come, we talked about this at the beginning of the course. We use these big fancy Greek words, epistemology and ontology. How you gain knowledge, epistemology, how do you gain valid knowledge, and what ontology, what is your view of the world? Because they come with very different epistemologies and ontologies, we often see them as hard to kind of move together, right? And we think of these as very set in stone. And certainly, right, at the beginning of the course, I was like, quantitative research is natural science epistemology paired with social science research, right? And it has a realist ontology. An interpretivist epistemology, right, is more constructionist and is often paired with qualitative research. Okay. So, multi-strategy research or multi-methods research, is basically research that typically, so you can have a bunch of different ways. So you can have, say, multi-method research or mixed methods research that uses more than one, probably didn't need to write more than one quant method, or more than one qual method. So say you could mix ethnography with content analysis or interviews with content analysis. And technically, that's a multi-strategy or multi-method kind of research. But typically what we're talking about when we talk about mixed methods or multi-methods is something that integrates quantitative and qualitative approaches. Now, by far, I think the most common of these is survey and interview. I think when you look at like the bulk of it, at least in sociology, mixed method or multi-method research, and the order can be inverted in lots of cases, but the bulk of it is surveys and interviews, right? And typically, either when you're doing this kind of research, you don't assume an automatic connection between methods and philosophical assumptions, or I think like most normal people, you don't have, these really hard and narrow ontological and epistemological assumptions that dominate your life, and you have some intellectual flexibility to be like, oh, I actually think I could use interviews to learn more about this subject. And I think like people who are really, really locked into like either a realist natural science or positivistic ontology and epistemology, or a really constructivist qualitative epistemology is really rare, right? Like I don't think most people would be like, I would never trust survey data because I'm a constructionist and I believe in a measurable social reality. I'm sure there is a person like that somewhere. I've just never met that person. I think most people are smart enough to be like, oh, both of these offer something. Okay, so, there's no sound in this room because everything is broken. This is a video and it's useful-ish. I just don't know if you can hear it well enough. Let's try. I'll just crank the speakers up.
This is Frances Chumney with a quick introduction to mixed methods research. Mixed methods is a research approach that attempts to answer a research question through the collection and analysis of both quantitative and qualitative data. Two important characteristics of a mixed method study are the research questions and design. While the research questions inform what we are trying to learn about a phenomenon, they also inform the design that is selected to carry out the study. Generally speaking, a mixed method study based on an explanatory or exploratory research question will use a sequential design, which means that either the quantitative or qualitative data will be collected first and This is Frances Chumney with a quick introduction to mixed methods research. Are the research questions and design. While the research questions inform what we are trying to learn about a phenomenon, they also inform the design that is selected to carry out the study. Generally speaking, a mixed method study based on an explanatory or exploratory research question will use a sequential design, which means that either the quantitative or qualitative data will be collected first and then the other data will be collected. Similarly, a convergent research question typically calls for a concurrent design in which the quantitative and qualitative data are collected at about the same time. There are three types of mixed methods research questions: explanatory, exploratory, and convergent. All three types of questions rely on both quantitative and qualitative data, but the three differ in the order in which data are collected. The three types of mixed methods research questions also differ in how the quantitative and qualitative data are used once they have been collected. When the research question is explanatory mixed methods, the quantitative data are collected first. The qualitative data are generally collected after the quantitative data and are meant to serve the purpose of providing explanations for the results of the quantitative data. With this type of research question, the qualitative and quantitative data are collected at different times, but they work together to answer the same research question. When the research question is exploratory mixed methods, the qualitative data are collected first. The qualitative data are analyzed and the results are used to inform the collection of the quantitative data. With this type of research question, the qualitative and quantitative data are collected at different times, but they work together to answer the same research question. When the research question is convergent mixed methods, the quantitative and qualitative data can be collected at about the same time and are then used together to triangulate the findings and answer the research question. One of the challenges researchers face is the extent to which they can or should be confident in the results of a study. One of the best ways to increase a researcher's confidence in their findings is to provide evidence of the validity of the results. Triangulation is the practice of doing just that, drawing the same conclusion from more than one data set. Triangulation can be done with as few as 2 data sets or with as many data sets as a researcher can collect. One reason triangulation is so powerful is that the differing data sets do not have to include the same data collected from different groups or the same data collected at different times. The data could be collected from different groups or at different points in time, but the data could also be collected using different data collection methods, different modes of data collection, or the data itself could differ across sets. The distinction between mixed methods research and multiple methods research is often mistakenly overlooked. This error is understandable, though, given the inconsistency with which research terminology is used across various fields. The two terms are not synonymous, however, and it is important for students to understand the difference between the two types of research. Simply put, the difference is in whether quantitative and qualitative methods are used together to answer a single research question or not. When data from quantitative and qualitative methods are used together to answer a single research question, a mixed methods approach is employed. In contrast, in a single study that includes both quantitative and qualitative approaches, but those approaches do not answer the same research question, the study should be referred to as multiple methods. An easy way to remember the difference is that in mixed methods research, the results of quantitative and qualitative data collection are mixed together to answer a research question. In a multiple method study, multiple methods, being quantitative and qualitative methods, are used to answer multiple research questions.
I love this room. It's not like everything is falling apart. And in my other room on this same floor, they like installed a new computer with a USB-C plug-in. So it's like no adapter is needed and life is beautiful. And I just, like, why can't this room be that room? I don't know. Probably because that room seats 100 and this is not that big of a class. Okay, so yeah, she makes this nice distinction between multiple methods. But then my question is, well, what if you're answering the same research question, but you're using two quantitative methods or two qualitative methods? Is that, anyway, that's a question for another day. Okay, so.
This is Frances Chumney with a quick introduction to mixed methods research.
Okay. This natural science model and qualitative research, right? So we often think when we're talking qualitative research, qualitative research, we often think of it as having this non-natural science model. But that's a little bit too straightforward, right? A lot of times, people who are doing qualitative research, don't do what you would call grounded theory, right? And we'll go over grounded theory again in the next unit on analyzing qualitative data. We don't always do grounded theory, right? I'm sorry, the class is really quiet. I was writing. It's really cold down here. Like all the cold air just like swoops into the basement. If only there was some kind of system like doors that close to keep the cold air out or heating. Too much to ask of the university. Okay, so a lot of times when we're actually doing like qualitative research, we have this idea of like, and I laid it out at the beginning of the course, and now I'm undermining myself because this is what mixed methods demands of me. That we go with the data and then build the theory, right? But realistically, this isn't always the way qualitative research works, right? Sometimes you actually have a much more empiricist sort of qualitative research. And it's not the case that everybody who's doing qualitative research, assumes that there's no measurable social reality. Sometimes they just want a different kind of data that they think will help them better understand, say, the reasoning people have for behavior that they're measuring quantitatively. Okay, so empiricist overtones, right? They might have a desire for direct contact with reality. Procedures in which theories are grounded in data, but the meaning people give to their actions can be ascertained through their senses. I am making a mess of my slide, I'm sorry. All right, we're gonna clear that. So what does that mean, right? Like I said, sometimes people think that there is this grounded reality, they want contact with it, they think it's measurable, but people's motivations for why they're acting in a particular way aren't measurable quantitatively, and they want to get them through qualitative methods. So sometimes this distinction that I've been making for the entire course is a little bit untrue. Okay, a specific problem focus, right? Maybe there is a specific aspect of a social phenomenon. That's okay. So, yeah, it's not as bad. Like now the desks in 45, like when you lift the arms, they really just like clunk. So anyone who tries to leave early is like, boom. Like, goodbye. Have a good one. At least this one was just a squeak. Okay. So we also do qualitatively hypothesis and theory testing, right? It's not always the case that every qualitative researcher prances in. It's like, I'm just going to collect data. I have no idea what it means. La 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 la, and then comes up with a theory, right? A lot of times you have a sort of hypothesis that you want to figure out if it's true, right? I think this was certainly true, although my dissertation was definitely a qualitative one. I had a sort of idea what I thought I was going to find. Now I had to adjust that as I collected data, which was all qualitative, because I found different things than I thought I was going to find. But I wasn't necessarily like, I'm just going to look at things and create a theory after. I was like, no, I think I already know what's going on, right? And let's test if that's the case. Okay, so this kind of qualitative approach that's like theory testing is probably kind of halfway between the constructivist objectivist debate. But most people, like, honestly, if you read good research studies, right? If you go and read something that was mixed methods, and my favorite one, sorry, I'm a nerd, National Study of Youth and Religion, right? That came out of University of Notre Dame. I've read every single book that came out of the National Study of Youth and Religion, and I will say this, no one in that, and they did surveys, right? They started with 3,000 surveys, 300 interviews, and they did like 4 waves of this. The number of interviews and surveys reduced as they lost people, but that's okay. Never did Christian Smith or Melinda Denton or Patricia Snell ever be like, I am coming at the, I am basing my view on a constructivist worldview, blah, blah. No one ever talks like this, even in real and high quality social science research. Why? Because it's just not, that fruitful to cling to these positions that carefully, right? So, critical realism, this school, and here, right, Christian Smith is the arch critical realist. A lot of people who do this kind of mixed research using, say surveys and interviews, will come at this kind of middle road position that they call critical realism. And they say, social reality is produced by mechanisms that are real but not directly observable. And social scientists construct hypotheses about them and need to explain these mechanisms of causal influence, right? So there is a real social world that we can measure, and there are things that are produced by real social mechanisms, but in everyday life we can't see them. And how do we access them? Well, we do it by mixing quantitative and qualitative methods. And so we have a sort of more objectivist worldview, but also understand the constructivist point, right? Okay, does that make sense? Nod boredly. Okay. I feel like I'm excited about this and no one else is, because I actually kind of like mixed methods. I could go back to talking about Foucault if you want. I have more to say. Let's start with with Madness and Civilization, the first book, and go on from there. Okay. So quant research and interpretivism, right? A lot of quantitative researchers, they're also interested in the why, right? They can find, what they find with, say, survey data is the what, and they'll see social trends, but they can't always, figure out what the directionality of those social trends is, what's causing what, right? They might be like, oh, we think the direction of causation in this case is this way, but a lot of them will admit, that you need the why in order to get into that. And I mean, last year, kind of around the time I was teaching this, I was reading, as I do sometimes for weird reasons, a study of basically religiosity and porn, right? So people were trying to figure out what caused decreases in religiosity, or what was the direction of causality. Does watching porn make you less religious, or does watching porn make you less religious, or does becoming less religious make you watch more porn, right? And these authors went through and they had their lovely quantitative paper using data from the National Study of Youth and Religion and the General Social Survey and the Comparative Election Survey, and they had their H1, H2, H3 hypotheses that they tested in the data, and what did they write in the conclusion? We think that the direction of causation is, more porn, less religion. But what we actually really need to do to really figure out if this is true is interviews, where we ask people, what started first? The decline in your religious life or the porn, right? Because they sort of admit it. It's like, okay, we have this, we know that these two are correlated because we know that as, this goes up, that goes down. But we don't really know why, right? And so they said, we need to do a qualitative study or a mixed method study that examines this, right? So these are quantitative researchers, but they also want to know some of those why questions. Quantitative research claim attitudinal questions can access meaning. Yeah, so quantitative researchers, they will say that sometimes talking to people, particularly if the respondents are questioned in advance to create a survey question, you can get at some of the meaning inherent. I'll talk about how you might construct a mixed method survey probably on Friday or next Monday, because there's different ways of doing it depending on what you want to achieve with it. But there's definitely ways of using, say, qualitative research to enhance quantitative research either before, during, or after a research project. How are we doing for time? 2 minutes. I'm going to do this really quickly because I've been talking about it the whole time. Problems with this kind of quant-qual contrast. We tend to, we tend to split behavior and meaning, right? And often they're not actually that distinct, and it can be a very artificial distinction. Theories and concepts tested in research versus those emerging from the data. Again, this isn't always the case. It's not always the case that qualitative research is grounded theory and quant is, hypothesis testing. Sometimes they're both, right? And sometimes a quantitative researcher is going to do surveys not knowing what they're going to find and having no hypothesis and looking at the data and coming up with ideas based on that data. So it's not always that way. This number versus word and artificial versus natural, these are all kind of false distinctions that we use to sort of put these different methods in boxes, but are all kind of, artificial so that we can teach undergrad students quant and qual methods. But actually real researchers on the ground, I think, are rarely this doctrinaire about a lot of these distinctions. And then you're going to go take a course from someone else in the department and they're going to be like, numbers only, ever. But there's very few people I know in social science that are this doctrinaire about things. Goodbye. I don't have time to do another slide. I only have 1 minute. We'll see you on Friday. Again, lab tomorrow, lab forever. How far did I make it? I'm so close. Okay. Okay.